All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob. We are back with Immortal Thor and Storm fights Thor. This is dope, and that's just the tip of it. Now, before we get into that whole thing, we do have to talk about Beta Ray Bill because he becomes important later on in this story. So, one of the things that happens here is that back on Asgard, Loki returns after his whole little bit of a training session with Thor at the end of the last video that we did. Again, as always, we'll have a link at the end of the video for the Thor playlist so you can get caught up. It's pretty short, not going to be super long. But when he arrives back there, there's kind of a discussion, right? Beta Ray Bill has been on Asgard for quite some time, and in fact, when he left, he's been called back by Sif. The reason for this is because there's a three-way conversation here. When Loki came back to Asgard at the request of Thor, he started bringing people together, specifically Beta Ray Bill, because Bill is part of a plan. And in fact, even Loki says, I told Bill the honest truth. Surely you, Lady Sif, right, the new Heimdall, if you want to call her that, right? She's technically the sister of Heimdall, but she took his role, and she sees everything the same way Heimdall did after Heimdall died. And he asks her, surely you saw the conversation between myself and Thor. And while she does play a little bit coy in the sense that, like, I only see things that you allow me to see, yada, 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 for the most part, it's basically true, right? And so Beta Ray Bill kind of talks about his role here. And one of the things he says is, like, I have fought alongside Asgard for eons, right? For quite some time. But recently, I don't know if I trust Thor anymore. And I don't know if I trust the Asgardians anymore. Now, for those of you guys who don't know the reason for this, the really quick and simple explanation here is that at the beginning of Donny Cates' run on Thor, he became a herald of Galactus, and that he was going to lead Galactus around to these particular worlds in order to allow Galactus to destroy them, consume their energy, and then fight this multiversal being called the Black Winter. Because it would lead to the deaths of innocents, Beta Ray Bill tried to stand in Thor's way, and Thor beat the crap out of him. And so because of that, Beta Ray Bill doesn't really trust Thor in that capacity anymore. But the statement he makes is that he is a man of honor, and that in doing so, he basically says, I fight alongside Asgard, so at the very least, I will hear out Thor and hear what he has to say. Now, at this point, we transition over to everything with Storm. Now, of course, at the end of the last video, it was literally Thor telling Loki, I have to go find Storm. Thor ends up traveling to Arakko because, again, Storm, during the X-Men Red comics at the moment, is kind of in the midst of this gigantic Genesis war that's going on between the mutant populations. And so the result of this is that the crows of Thor literally appear and say, you are summoned, and just like snatch her up, right? And just teleport her directly to Thor. Now, at this point, you have the two of them who are seemingly on the moon. And the result of this is that Storm's like, you better return me back home, man, because like I have some serious stuff going on, right? But what ends up happening here is Thor's ravens appear to Storm and they're just like, you've been summoned. And they basically whisk her away from Arakko, teleport her to the moon, where Thor's waiting on her. Now, the cool thing here is that she says, like, I'm busy. I do not have time for this. And the reality is that's true. Right, if you guys are watching our coverage, you're following our coverage of Fall of X, right now in the X-Men Red comic, Storm is in the middle of the Genesis War. This war between like the mutant populations on Arakko, formerly known as Mars. And so she's like, I got stuff going on, man. Like literally, I'm trying to keep my people alive in the midst of this giant war. I don't have time for dilly-dallying, right? And so at that point, Thor simply says, well, then I apologize for the abruptness of the summons, Ororo. And she's like, apology accepted if you return me to Arakko. Now, now here's the cool thing, right? Al Ewing is writing both X-Men Red and he's writing this. And what you're about to see here is what happens when you have a writer that's writing two different comic books and basically has them cross over. It's phenomenal because as most of you guys know who are either reading X-Men Red or watching our videos on X-Men Red, Storm is dope in Marvel Comics right now, and she's more powerful than she's ever been. And so the thing about this is she literally just like snaps her fingers and lightning just starts coming down, hitting Thor, because like he's not gonna let her go. And so the whole time this is happening, he's not necessarily just kind of like smiling and laughing or anything like that, but it's a kind of source of entertainment to a degree. And so he just basically tells like the lightning, stop hitting me, right? Stop striking me. And it does. It ends, like it literally stops. And the funny thing here is when Ororo's just like, why? He's like, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the lightning. He's like, the lightning answers to me as much as it answers to you, right? I command the lightning. And that's kind of been a big question a lot of people had, right? Like if Storm commands the lightning and Thor commands the lightning, who wins on that little scuffle? Because we know that by brute strength alone, Thor would absolutely dominate Storm, right? In like a physical hand-to-hand confrontation. But this is one of the things that Al Ewing does that I absolutely love. What she says is, I trust this lightning to convey the seriousness of my message. And though I enjoy the play of the lightning, there are more universal forces. Atmospheric pressure, for example. And there are places where the atmospheric pressure is high, such as Jupiter. She literally changes the atmospheric pressure around Thor. In effect, she increases how much air is pushing down on him. It's similar to the effect of somebody like graviton, right? Increasing the gravity around a person. But in this instance, she can isolate it and increase it around Thor. But it's more than simply just like pulling him down to the ground. It's just like increasing the density of the air around him, right? His muscles are screaming, his bones are popping. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. If she were to do this to like a normal person, it would be as if this person were suddenly teleported to Jupiter. And assuming they somehow had a way to breathe in Jupiter's atmosphere, they would be crushed by the pressure, right down to a pulp. Right? It'd be like going to the very, to the lowest point. It would be like descending down to like the bottom of the ocean, right? Where the pressure is just astronomically high. But Thor is able to withstand all of this, right? And Storm literally says, you command the storm, Thor, I command the weather, and not as a king on a throne, but I command it as an equal. And this right there just kind of like solidifies who would win in a fight between the two, right? Like with Thor, it's brute strength, lightning, and that's more or less it. He does kind of command the weather to a degree, but not on the same level that Storm does. And Storm's ability to increase the pressure around him, all that kind of stuff, she'd easily be able to take on Thor. I don't know if she'd be able to destroy him or kill him, but she would certainly hold the upper hand for quite a bit of time. So I want to know from you guys, who do you think would actually win in this? Now, where this is kind of like the end of the fight between the two, do not let that deceive you, because this story gets crazy. So what ends up happening here is he says, who's stronger, right? And she's like, what are you talking about? And he says, the question those like us are always asked, who is stronger? Can I arm wrestle the Hulk, run a race with Quicksilver, challenge Willie Lumpkin in an ear-wiggling contest, right? And so he literally takes his hammer and throws it at her, right? And then in turn, Storm catches it. Now, the funny thing about this is this would be one of those things where we could kind of dismiss it and say, yet another person who's lifting the hammer of Thor and she's going to beat him with him. Nope, that's not going to happen. It's not going to be a fight between Thor and Storm with Storm having the hammer. There's a much bigger scheme at play here, because as he throws it to her, it simply says, whosoever holds the hammer, if they be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. And so literally once she catches it, he says, and not a moment too soon, look up, and Tyrannos is back. Now, for those of you guys who aren't following the Thor mythos right now, Tyrannos is being introduced to us as an elder god, right? This is a guy who basically existed on Earth in its earliest days. Guys like Chthon, right? They're just beings who have been around since the early days of existence. And where most of them were either destroyed, defeated, or took off to other dimensions, this is one of those instances where this guy represents one of these elder gods. And that's where Storm is absolutely like totally flabbergasted. She was like, you summoned me to fight that thing? She's like, you're right. It was urgent, right? And one of the things he tells her is that when she says, if you don't have your hammer, you cannot be Thor, his response is, no, I have my own power now. Because remember, in his training session with Loki, Loki kind of, I wouldn't go as far as to say unlocked a latent ability within Thor, but Loki taught Thor to think outside the box, to be more than just a god that has a hammer and just uses it to hit stuff. So Thor is thinking on a much higher level than he traditionally would. And so where you do have like this whole attack going on between Tyrannos and Thor and Storm and so on and so forth, that Loki emerges out of nowhere, right? And this is what Thor counted on. Thor counted on Loki appearing here. And in turn, he tells Storm, throw the hammer at Loki. And so when she does, like Loki's just like, nope, I'm not catching that thing, right? Like that's a hero's task if ever I saw one. And fortunately, I have one right here. He opens the portal, Beta Ray Bill emerges, and Beta Ray Bill catches the hammer, right? So it's just like, you can kind of see what's going on here, right? It's being passed around. The hammer's being passed around to different people. When Beta Ray Bill finally gets the hammer back, he goes to the classic Beta Ray Bill look that we've all missed for so long, right? I miss seeing Beta Ray Bill in this whole outfit, right? And so he officially becomes the returned warrior of Asgard. And so that's when Storm chimes in and she says, whenever you throw the hammer to somebody and the person who had it loses possession of it, how long do the Thor powers last? And his response is 60 seconds. And we're all going to need that 60 seconds. And so in turn, the hammer is held by Beta Ray Bill, is handed to Loki. Loki grabs the hammer, he becomes Thor. Like, Storm touches the hammer again, becomes Thor, and then the hammer's thrown to Jane Foster, who arrives as Valkyrie, and she becomes Thor. And so you get like this just ridiculously dope moment where this was the plan of Thor. Like, the plan of Thor was to throw the hammer at Storm to see if she was worthy. And if she was, she would get his powers. Then give the hammer to Beta Ray Bill, who we already knew was worthy, so he would get the Thor powers back. Give it to Loki to see whether or not he can be worthy, which he is. So now Loki, this really establishes he is a tried and true good guy. Seemingly, that's the case. I don't know if I really believe that the inscription says, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be a good guy, shall possess the power of Thor." It's not what it says, but Loki is worthy to lift the hammer. Jane Foster's back as Thor, and Thor literally tells this guy, right? Like, "Behold, Tyrannos, you could not defeat Thor when he stood alone, and now you face a Thor core, the Thor core." Thor created an army of himself. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. If you need to get caught up on the Thor comics, make sure you guys click this link to the playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.